It was just another late night in Florida. The kind of night when the air still feels heavy even after the sun has gone down, and the neon glow of strip mall signs flickers across mostly empty parking lots. At a Walmart on the edge of town, the night shift was winding down. Inside, employees were restocking shelves, scanning the last few carts of groceries, and mopping the aisles for the morning rush. Out in the parking lot, rows of cars sat quiet under the dull orange of the sodium lamps. It was an ordinary, unremarkable scene until it wasn't. For Ethan Ward, a 38-year-old warehouse worker, that night started like countless others. He had clocked out from his own shift a little earlier and decided, almost on impulse, to swing by the store where his wife worked. Maybe he'd surprise her with a ride home. Maybe it would be one of those small gestures that reminded her they were still in this together. On the surface, Ethan and Monica had a marriage people might describe as steady, if not exciting. They had bills paid on time, a small house they were proud of, and routines that had hardened into habits. But under that surface, Ethan had felt the distance growing. He brushed it off most days. Every couple has rough patches, he told himself. Monica, 34, was the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. She had worked at that Walmart for years, reliable enough to be trusted with late shifts, friendly enough that customers remembered her name. To coworkers, she seemed easygoing, maybe even a little too close with some of them. And though Ethan noticed the way she laughed at certain jokes or lingered in certain conversations, he buried those thoughts, convincing himself it was harmless. He never said much, partly because he didn't want to seem jealous, partly because some truths are easier to ignore. One name, though, kept coming up more often than Ethan would admit: Carlos Ramirez. 36 years old, a fellow night shift employee who was known for his charm, his easy smile, and the way he always managed to lighten the mood in a job that could be thankless. To outsiders, Carlos seemed harmless, just another working man pulling long hours to get by. But to Ethan, there was something in the way Monica mentioned him that unsettled him. Still, suspicion is a dangerous seed. Once planted, it grows in silence. That night, as Ethan's old sedan rolled into the Walmart lot, he spotted Monica's car tucked away in one of the darker corners. Strange, he thought. Why park so far from the building when closer spots were open? He slowed his car, headlights washing over empty asphalt, and something caught his eye: the faint, rhythmic rocking of Monica's car. At first, he didn't process what he was seeing. The parking lot was mostly deserted, silent except for the hum of a few far-off light poles. But the closer he looked, the harder it was to deny. The car wasn't still. A wave of unease hit him in the gut. His heart began to pound, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Maybe it was nothing, he tried to tell himself. Maybe she was just getting something from the back seat. But deep down, Ethan knew. Every suspicion he had buried, every glance, and every late night came flooding back with brutal clarity. The world seemed to narrow, his vision fixed on that car in the shadows. He parked a short distance away, engine still running as he sat frozen, trying to decide what to do. Step out and confront her? Drive off and pretend he hadn't seen anything? Or just wait, heart hammering, until the truth revealed itself? His hands trembled, and he reached instinctively for the glove compartment where he kept a small handgun. Florida wasn't the safest place at night, and he had always justified carrying it as protection. Tonight, though, the cold weight of the gun in his lap felt different, less like safety, more like inevitability. Every marriage has secrets, and every parking lot has stories. But that night at Walmart, Ethan Ward's life was about to collide with both in the most devastating way. Within minutes, what began as a simple late-night drive would spiral into a nightmare that left two people dead and a community grasping for answers. Ethan's boots scraped against the asphalt as he stepped out of his car, every sound in that empty lot amplified by the silence of the hour. The air felt thick, humid, the kind of Florida night that sticks to your skin. He moved slowly at first, telling himself he might be wrong, that maybe Monica was just sitting inside her car, talking on the phone, or resting before heading home. But as he drew closer, the truth became harder to deny. The car rocked in a way no explanation could soften. The world seemed to tilt. Ethan's mouth went dry, and the blood in his ears roared louder than the hum of the lamps above. He could see shadows moving through the condensation-fogged windows. A shape shifting, bodies pressed close. His chest tightened with every step. He wanted to turn away, to leave before the image was burned into his mind forever. But something inside him pushed forward, an ugly magnet pulling him to the source of his worst fears. He crept along the driver's side, careful not to make sound. His breath hitched as he caught sight of Monica's purse on the front seat, wide open, lipstick rolling out. A pair of work keys dangled from the ignition, though the engine was off. His eyes darted to the back seat. Through the glass, fogged and streaked, he could make out the unmistakable outline of his wife's body entangled with another. Monica's hair fell across her bare shoulders, and a man's hand, Carlos's hand, gripped her waist. It hit Ethan like a physical blow. All the rationalizations he had clung to, she's just friendly, they're only co-workers, nothing to worry about, shattered in an instant. His heart thrashed against his ribs, each beat fanning the flames of betrayal and rage. He felt humiliated, emasculated, like the butt of a cruel joke he hadn't realized he was part of until this moment. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had shared a life with, was giving herself to someone else in the most degrading place imaginable, a Walmart parking lot. He staggered backward, one hand clutching his mouth as if to stop himself from crying out. His mind was a storm, a rush of images and memories colliding. Their wedding day, quiet dinners at home, the way Monica used to laugh when they first met. And now this. He pressed his fist against his temple, trying to block it out, but the muffled moans and the creak of car springs sliced through the night air like knives. A surge of anger drowned out everything else. His pulse raced, his vision tunneled. Without realizing, his hand went again to the glove compartment of his own car. The gun felt heavier than it ever had before, a terrible weight promising both release and destruction. He wasn't thinking about consequences, about police, about prison. All he could see was the betrayal unfolding right in front of him, and all he could feel was the need to stop it. He advanced again, this time not as a hesitant husband, but as a man consumed. He gripped the handle of Monica's car door and yanked it open so violently that the hinges squealed. The sudden rush of air broke the cocoon inside, and in that frozen moment, time seemed to stop. Monica gasped, eyes wide, her body jerking upright. Carlos's face turned from passion to horror, his shirt halfway undone. They both froze, as if hoping somehow this wasn't real, as if Ethan might vanish if they stayed perfectly still. But Ethan was very real, and the look in his eyes was something neither of them had ever seen before. "You!" Ethan hissed, voice shaking with fury. His gaze shifted from Monica to Carlos and back again. "Here, in my face, in my car." His words stumbled, half incoherent, but the meaning was clear. This was not just betrayal. It was an execution of trust so brutal it stripped him of all restraint. Monica stammered, trying to gather words. "Ethan, please, it's not." But she didn't finish. Carlos raised his hands in a weak gesture of surrender, his voice pleading, "Man, it's not what you think, just calm down." But calm was a language Ethan no longer understood. The betrayal, the shame, The raw humiliation of finding his wife with another man in the backseat of a car they both paid for. It had twisted something deep inside him. In that instant, reason collapsed and only rage remained. The parking lot, once so ordinary, had become a stage for the kind of moment people spend their whole lives hoping never to face. And for Ethan Ward, standing at the open door with a gun in his hand, it was already too late to walk away. Ethan's hand trembled as it hovered near the pistol, the metallic glint catching the faint orange glow from the Walmart parking lot lamps. His breathing was ragged, torn between sobs and growls. Monica's eyes locked onto him, wide with terror, lips quivering as if searching for the right words to stitch the wound she had just carved open. Carlos, half-dressed, raised his palms higher, voice strained. "Man, just put it down. We can talk about this. Please." But Ethan wasn't listening. The betrayal played on loop in his head, louder than the sound of his wife's voice, louder than the night itself. Each second Monica sat there beside Carlos was another knife in his gut. In his mind, they weren't just having sex. They were laughing at him, mocking him, turning him into a fool under the same stars where he had promised her forever. "Talk." Ethan spat, his voice cracking. "What the hell is left to talk about?" He stepped closer, the barrel of the gun rising almost of its own will. Monica reached out a hand toward him, shaking, whispering his name like a prayer. "Ethan, please. I'm sorry." That word, sorry, ignited something violent inside him. Sorry couldn't erase the image burned into his skull, couldn't undo the humiliation of finding his wife with another man in the back seat of her car, in plain sight of anyone who cared to look. His finger twitched on the trigger. The first shot cracked through the silence like a thunderclap. Glass shattered as the bullet tore into Carlos's chest. His body jerked backward against the seat, a choked cry escaping before the air left his lungs. Monica screamed, the sound piercing the night, raw and animalistic. She scrambled toward the opposite door, desperate to escape. Ethan's world went red. He pivoted, firing again, one shot then another. Monica's body convulsed as the bullet struck, her scream cutting short into a wet gasp. Blood sprayed across the interior, staining the upholstery, streaking her once familiar face. She collapsed half across the seat, half on Carlos's limp body, her hand reaching out for Ethan even as life drained from her eyes. The echo of gunfire rolled across the empty lot, bouncing off concrete walls, fading into a silence more terrible than the sound itself. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, the gun heavy in his grip, smoke curling from the barrel. His ears rang, drowning out the distant cries of shocked onlookers who had peeked out from the Walmart doors after hearing the shots. He stared at what he had done. Monica's hair was matted with blood, her eyes still open, glassy and fixed on nothing. Carlos's chest rose once, twice, then stilled. The car that had once carried them on errands and family drives was now a coffin, the back seat slick with crimson. Ethan's breath came in shuddering bursts. The rage that had propelled him only seconds ago drained as quickly as it had come, leaving behind something colder. Horror. He staggered back from the car, nearly tripping over himself, the gun dangling from his hand. His mind scrambled for meaning, for justification, but all he found was the terrible finality of death staring back at him. People were shouting now. A security guard had sprinted toward the lot, radio clutched in one hand. A woman loading groceries dropped her bags, kins rolling across the pavement as she screamed for someone to call 911. Headlights from a passing truck lit the scene for a split second, painting Ethan in stark white like a figure caught on stage. Still, Ethan didn't run. He stood beside the open car door, his body trembling, muttering to no one in particular. "They kill me first. They killed me first. His voice was broken, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. He lifted the gun again, for a fleeting moment pressing it against his own temple, but his hand faltered. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder by the second. The red-blue strobe of patrol cars began to paint the horizon, a warning that this nightmare was only beginning. The parking lot reeked of gunpowder and blood. Shards of glass glittered on the ground like cruel confetti. The once ordinary Walmart backdrop, shopping carts lined up in neat rows, sale posters plastered on the walls, now framed a massacre. It was the kind of scene, one expected when they drove out to buy groceries, and the kind of image that would haunt every witness for years to come. Ethan finally let the gun slip from his fingers. It clattered onto the pavement, the sound sharp and final. He dropped to his knees, face in his hands, sobbing. When the police arrived moments later, weapons drawn, they didn't need to chase him. He didn't fight. He didn't move. He simply whispered through his tears, "I couldn't take it. I couldn't watch them do that to me." The officers cuffed him as paramedics rushed past, though they knew it was too late for the two broken bodies in the car. Flashing lights bathed the lot, illuminating a tragedy born in seconds, but destined to ripple through families, through courtrooms, through headlines. And as Ethan was led away, his wife's blood still drying on his shirt, one truth settled heavy in the air. A moment of blind rage had destroyed 3 lives, and there was no turning back. The flashing blue and red lights broke the darkness of the Walmart parking lot, their reflections bouncing off the rows of parked cars like jagged shards of color. Within minutes of the 911 calls, patrol cruisers swarmed the scene. Tires screeched as officers poured out, weapons drawn, voices cutting through the humid night. "Drop down. Hands where we can see them. Step away. Now." The command came again, harder this time. Something in Ethan gave way. He raised both hands slowly, his shoulders sagging as though they carried the weight of the entire parking lot. The officers advanced in a tight formation, one kicking the gun further out of reach while another moved in behind him. Cold steel clamped around his wrists, the sound of handcuffs loud in his ears. Ethan didn't resist. He barely even registered it. "Sir, do you understand you're under arrest for the shooting tonight?" a deputy asked, voice steady but clipped. Ethan nodded faintly, eyes fixed on the blood pooling beneath the car door. He muttered the same broken phrase as the cuffs tightened. The deputy exchanged a glance with his partner, another suspect who had already decided on his own guilt before the law had its say. Nearby, paramedics rushed toward the victims, but the urgency in their steps dulled quickly as reality set in. Carlos's chest showed no rise. Monica's pulse offered no flicker of life. The ambulance lights spun pointlessly, illuminating the hopelessness of their work. A paramedic shook her head, quietly pulling a white sheet from her bag. Gasps rippled through the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered near the store entrance, some holding cell phones up, others clutching their mouths in disbelief. The Walmart night manager, pale and trembling, tried to guide employees back inside, but the spectacle held them frozen. This wasn't the kind of violence they expected in their parking lot. This was supposed to be the place where families came for groceries, not where a family came to die. As Ethan was lifted to his feet and guided toward a patrol car, his face streaked with tears and sweat, the questions began flying. Reporters wouldn't arrive until later, but by then the story was already writing itself in whispers. He caught her cheating. He lost it. He shot them both. Some voices carried judgment, others pity, but all agreed on one thing. This was a nightmare made public, the kind of thing you don't unsee. In the back seat of the cruiser, Ethan leaned his forehead against the metal grate, the coolness of brief relief against his feverish skin. He could still smell the gunpowder clinging to his clothes. his wedding ring pressed painfully against his bound fingers. Every blink replayed the scene. Monica's last gasp, the look in Carlos's eyes when the first shot rang out. He wanted to scream, to claw at the air, but all that came was a hollow sob. Detective Carla Hughes arrived a few minutes later, her unmarked car pulling up with a sense of quiet authority. She strode across the lot, her gaze sweeping the chaos, pausing briefly on the blood-splattered car before settling on Ethan through the cruiser window. Even from a distance, she saw the look, part broken man, part killer who couldn't undo what had been done. She didn't need the full story yet. The scene spoke volumes. By the time officers draped the white sheets over Monica and Carlos, the parking lot had become a graveyard of sorts. The smell of copper hung thick in the air. Walmart employees clung to each other, crying, while customers were ushered away under the buzz of fluorescent lights. Ethan sat shackled in the patrol car, rocking slightly as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. But this wasn't a dream. It was the start of something worse. An investigation, a trial, a lifetime of consequences that no apology could erase. And as the cruiser pulled away, leaving the flashing lights and blood-soaked asphalt behind, Ethan closed his eyes and whispered one last time, "I couldn't take it." The world outside would soon know his name, not as a husband or a worker, but as the man who turned a Walmart parking lot into a crime scene. The Walmart parking lot was still cordoned off at dawn, yellow tape fluttering in the morning breeze while crime scene vans and patrol cars dotted the asphalt. For the investigators, what had happened in those few violent minutes was clear enough on the surface. 2 bodies in a car, 1 man in custody. But in the justice system, nothing is ever that simple. Detective Carla Hughes stood at the edge of the scene, her notepad balanced in one hand, eyes scanning every detail with clinical precision. She was a veteran of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, someone who had seen her share of ugly crime scenes. Yet even she felt a heaviness looking at this one. A Walmart parking lot, a place families drove through every day, had turned into a spectacle of betrayal and bloodshed. It was the kind of case guaranteed to ignite public fury and media obsession. The forensics team moved methodically. They photographed the shattered glass, the blood spatter across the back seat, the bullet casings scattered on the pavement. Each casing was bagged, labeled, and tagged, their placement marked with numbered cones that turned the lot into a grim chessboard. The murder weapon, a Glock pistol registered to Ethan Ward, had already been secured. Ballistics would later confirm every round fired that night came from that gun. Carla leaned into the car, her latex gloves brushing against the sticky residue of dried blood. Monica lay slumped against Carlos, their bodies overlapping in death as they had been in life. It was an image that would haunt a jury, Carla knew, the wife and her lover, frozen together by violence. She noted the angle of entry wounds, the proximity of shots. This hadn't been a chaotic spray. It was close-range, deliberate. Across the lot, Ethan sat in an interrogation room of the station, still wearing the same blood-speckled clothes from the night before. He looked hollow, like a man whose rage had burned out and left nothing but ash. When Carla stepped in, he didn't lift his eyes at first. "You want to tell me what happened?" she asked gently, though her voice carried the edge of authority. Ethan's story spilled out in fragments. He had come to surprise Monica, he said. He saw the car rocking. He opened the door and found them together. "I just lost it," he muttered, hands clenching in a fist despite the cuffs. "They were laughing at me. I swear they were laughing." His voice cracked as tears welled. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for it to go that far." But Carla wasn't in the business of taking words at face value. She pressed him on details. Why had he carried a loaded gun that night? Was it really just a habit, or had he suspected something? Ethan insisted he carried the pistol everywhere for protection. Yet when Carla asked if he had ever confronted Monica about Carlos before, his silence spoke volumes. The evidence piled up quickly. Security cameras from the Walmart exterior captured the flashes of gunfire, though not the intimate details inside the car. Audio from a nearby surveillance mic picked up Monica's scream and Ethan's shouts. Several employees testified they had heard rumors of Monica and Carlos growing close during late shifts, whispers that had now become a tragic reality. An autopsy conducted by medical examiner Dr. Elaine Chun confirmed the brutality of the act. Monica had been shot twice, once through the chest, another grazing her shoulder before striking her neck. Carlos had taken 2 rounds to the torso and 1 to the arm, wounds consistent with shots fired at close range. Both deaths were ruled homicides. The prosecution's narrative began to crystallize. Ethan Ward hadn't merely snapped in the heat of the moment. He had acted with intent. He had a weapon ready. He approached the car deliberately, and he fired multiple times. To them, this wasn't just a husband overcome with jealousy. It was a man who made a choice. Still, the defense had its angle. Samuel Breyer, a sharp defense attorney known for leaning into human frailty, argued that Ethan's actions were the textbook definition of a crime of passion. Florida law allowed for heat-of-the-moment defenses, and Samuel intended to use every ounce of sympathy available. A man betrayed, humiliated, pushed to his breaking point, he said during early hearings. Not a cold-blooded killer, but a husband whose world was destroyed before his eyes. Carla, though, wasn't swayed by emotional appeals. She'd seen enough cases to know that passion and premeditation weren't always so neatly separated. These questions would form the backbone of the prosecution's case. Meanwhile, the families of the victims prepared for their own battles. Monica's relatives struggled with conflicting emotions, grief for their daughter and sister, but also shame at the scandal of how she died. Carlos's family, by contrast, burned with anger, demanding the harshest punishment for Ethan. He didn't just kill Carlos, his sister told reporters. He killed our trust, our future. He doesn't get to hide behind excuses. As the investigation concluded, Carla handed over her findings to Assistant District Attorney Carling Nguyen, who specialized in high-profile murder cases. Together, they crafted a timeline, laying out how Ethan left work, drove to the Walmart, armed with a loaded gun, and made the fatal choice when faced with betrayal. By the time the grand jury convened, the narrative was sharp and undeniable. A parking lot affair, a jealous husband, 2 lives cut short, and a 3rd forever destroyed. Whether it was premeditated or not would be for a trial to decide. But one fact was already carved in stone. The Walmart murders would not fade quietly. The evidence was ready. The stage was set. And Ethan Ward, once just another face in the Florida night, was about to stand trial in front of the world. The courthouse in Jacksonville buzzed with a kind of electricity that only comes when a case has already captured the public's imagination. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Protesters and supporters held homemade signs, some painted with justice for Monica and Carlos, others scrawled with phrases like "heat of passion isn't murder." Families, neighbors, and strangers alike packed into the gallery, drawn by the spectacle of a husband who had turned a Walmart parking lot into a killing ground. When Ethan Ward was led into the courtroom for the first day of his trial, shackled and dressed in a plain suit borrowed from his public defender's office, the air seemed to tighten. He kept his eyes low, face gaunt, the weight of months in jail etched into his features. For Monica's family, seated in the front row, it was the first time they had seen him since that night. Some glared, others wept silently. Carlos's relatives, sitting opposite, whispered prayers in Spanish, clutching rosaries. Presiding over the trial was Judge Leonard Harlow, a stern man with a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings. He reminded the jury that their duty was to weigh facts, not feelings. But even he knew this case would be decided as much by emotion as by evidence. Assistant District Attorney Carlin Nguyen stood to deliver the prosecution's opening statement. Her voice was calm but resolute, honed from years of speaking to juries. "This is not a case about an accident," she began. "This is not about a man who stumbled into tragedy. This is about choice. Ethan Ward chose to bring a loaded gun. He chose to open that car door. And he chose to fire multiple times, ending 2 lives in cold blood." She laid out the evidence methodically. The Glock pistol, the surveillance footage, the autopsy reports, and the testimony of employees who had heard the gunfire. She painted Ethan as a man who, even if betrayed, had alternatives. "Ladies and gentlemen, betrayal does not justify murder," she concluded, her gaze fixed on the jury box. Then it was the defense's turn. Attorney Samuel Breyer adjusted his tie, took a breath, and walked deliberately toward the jury. His tone was softer, almost paternal. "You'll hear words like cold blood in this courtroom," he said. "But what you won't hear is the human heart behind this tragedy. Ethan Ward is not a monster. He is a husband, a man who discovered his wife with another man, in the most humiliating, brutal way imaginable, and who snapped." Breyer leaned in closer, lowering his voice. He did not plan this. He did not stalk them. He did not wait in the shadows with malice in his heart. He walked into a nightmare and reacted like any man might when his world was torn apart in an instant. The defense would argue for second-degree murder at most, framing Ethan's actions as a crime of passion, a tragic but impulsive act rather than premeditated execution. The trial unfolded over 2 grueling weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Walmart employees described hearing the shots, rushing outside, and seeing Ethan standing by the car, gun still in hand. A security guard testified he saw Ethan drop to his knees afterward, sobbing, repeating, "They killed me first." Forensics experts detailed the angles of the bullets, the distances involved. Dr. Elaine Shun, the medical examiner, walked the jury through autopsy photos. She spoke clinically, but her words carried weight. The shots were fired at close range. These wounds are consistent with deliberate targeting, not wild or accidental firing. The images flashed on the projector were enough to make jurors shift in their seats. Then came the testimony of Detective Carla Hughes. She described Ethan's demeanor during interrogation, his words about feeling mocked, his insistence that he just lost control. Nguyen pressed her to clarify. "Detective, in your professional opinion, did the suspect appear aware of his actions that night?" Hughes answered firmly, "Yes. He knew what he was doing. He retrieved his weapon. He approached the car. He fired until both victims were down." The defense countered with character witnesses. Ethan's sister took the stand, voice trembling as she described her brother as a hard-working man who had never been violent before. A coworker testified that Ethan often carried his gun for protection, not aggression. Breyer leaned on these points heavily, trying to show that Ethan's decision to shoot wasn't pre-planned but born from a singular, unbearable moment. When Ethan himself took the stand, the courtroom grew deathly quiet. His voice was hoarse, his hands clenched together as if in prayer. "I loved her," he said, eyes brimming. "I worked every day to give her a life. And then I saw her with him like I wasn't even real. I just lost it. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just wanted the pain to stop." Nguyen's cross-examination was brutal. "You wanted the pain to stop, so you stopped 2 lives. Isn't that correct?" Ethan's voice faltered. "I didn't mean, but you did." Nguyen cut in. "You pulled the trigger not once, but multiple times. You aimed at your wife. You aimed at her coworker. That is not losing control. That is choosing control, the worst kind of control. In closing arguments, Nguyen hammered home the theme of choice. She told the jury that if society excused murder under the banner of betrayal, no marriage would be safe. Breyer, on the other hand, begged for compassion. "We are not judging a machine," he said. "We are judging a man whose life crumbled in seconds. Don't let grief blind you to humanity." The jury deliberated for 2 long days. Outside, the courthouse steps became a stage for cable news broadcasts and heated debates. Was Ethan a victim of heartbreak or a calculating killer? Inside, 12 men and women weighed his fate in silence. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom bristled with tension. Judge Harlow asked the foreperson to rise. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Ethan Ward, guilty of second-degree murder on both counts." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Monica's mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Carlos's brother clenched his fist, muttering a prayer of thanks. Ethan slumped in his chair, shoulders caving in, tears spilling freely. As deputies led Ethan away in chains, the courtroom erupted, some in relief, others in sorrow. Reporters scrambled for quotes, cameras flashed, and outside the courthouse, chants rose into the hot Florida air. The trial was over, but the questions it raised lingered. How thin is the line between passion and premeditation? How far can betrayal push a person before rage becomes irreversible? For Ethan Ward, those questions no longer mattered. His answers were carved into history the moment he pulled the trigger in that Walmart parking lot. The courtroom was silent except for the faint creak of wooden benches as people shifted, waiting. Ethan Ward stood as the jury filed back in, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, knuckles white. His face looked hollow, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights in a jail cell. Judge Leonard Harlow nodded to the jury foreperson. "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The foreperson unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "On the charge of second-degree murder in the death of Monica Ward, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of second-degree murder in the death of Carlos Ramirez, we find the defendant guilty." A sharp gasp broke the stillness, followed by muffled cries. Monica's mother clutched her daughter's wedding photo, tears streaking down her cheeks. Carlos's brother gripped the pew so hard his knuckles blanched, whispering a prayer of thanks. Across the aisle, Ethan's sister buried her face in her hands, sobbing softly. Ethan closed his eyes, shoulders sagging. He didn't argue, didn't shake his head. Deep down, he had known this moment was coming. All his lawyer's arguments about passion and betrayal couldn't erase the reality that he had pulled the trigger again and again. Judge Harlow cleared his throat, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Mr. Ward, you stand convicted on 2 counts of second-degree murder. This court has considered the nature of the crime, the impact on the families, and the need to uphold justice. While this was not premeditated in the strictest legal sense, it was deliberate, it was violent, and it was final." He paused, eyes fixed on Ethan. "You felt betrayed. You felt humiliated. But betrayal does not give license to kill. 2 families have lost loved ones. A community has been shaken. And for that, there must be accountability." The sentence fell like a gavel before the gavel. Gasps echoed again, followed by a ripple of whispers. Ethan's knees buckled slightly, and the deputies moved closer, steadying him as the reality settled in. He turned once, briefly, toward Monica's family, his lips parting as though he might speak. But no words came. Only tears traced down his face before he lowered his head. Assistant District Attorney Carla Nguyen exhaled, her expression one of grim satisfaction. For her, justice had been served. Defense Attorney Samuel Breyer placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, whispering something that went unheard over the din of voices rising in the gallery. Outside the courthouse, the verdict spread like wildfire. Reporters shouted updates into cameras, their voices tinged with urgency. The Walmart parking lot murder, as it had been branded by the media, now had its ending, though for the families, there was no real closure. Inside, Judge Harlow struck his gavel one final time. This court is adjourned. The deputies moved to escort Ethan away, chains rattling as he shuffled toward the side door. Each step was heavy, final, echoing against the marble floors like the sound of a man walking into the rest of his life. As he disappeared from sight, Monica's mother whispered through her tears, "At least she can rest now." Carlos's family embraced, their grief mixing with a sense of vindication. And Ethan's sister sat alone on the bench, staring at the empty doorway where her brother had vanished, knowing she would only ever see him again through prison glass. The sentence was more than punishment. It was a reminder to everyone watching that rage, no matter how blinding, carried consequences, that in a single night, choices could destroy not just one life, but many. And in Florida, under the harsh lights of justice, Ethan Ward's choices had sealed his fate forever. The trial was over, but the echoes of that night in a Walmart parking lot did not fade. In Jacksonville, the case became more than a headline. It was a cautionary tale whispered in kitchens, debated in bars, and dissected on talk shows across the country. People kept asking the same questions. How could a marriage crumble so completely? How could a man's grief and rage turn so swiftly into murder? The parking lot itself bore no scars. Within days, the blood was scrubbed away, the shattered glass swept clean, and shoppers once again pushed carts across the same blacktop. But for those who had witnessed it, the employees who heard the gunshots, the mother who dropped her groceries as screams pierced the night, the memory lingered. To them, the lot was no longer just a place to buy milk and bread. It was a place where trust had died. Monica's family held a quiet vigil outside the Walmart 1 month later. Candles flickered in paper cups, casting small circles of light in the humid evening. Her mother spoke haltingly about her daughter, about the mistakes she may have made, about the unfairness of her death. She didn't deserve to be taken like that, she said, her voice breaking. Nobody does. Across town, Carlos's family organized their own memorial. Friends remembered his quick humor, his easy smile, the way he always offered to cover shifts. Both families shared the same hollow truth. 2 lives cut short, their future stolen by one man's rage. In prison, Ethan adjusted to the cold rhythm of life behind bars. His name, once ordinary, was now tied to a tragedy strangers debated endlessly. Some saw him as a monster, a man who let anger define him. Others, though fewer, saw him as broken, a husband pushed past the edge by betrayal. But whatever sympathy lingered could not change the steel bars or the life sentence stretching before him. Ethan himself seemed to understand that. In a rare statement to a prison chaplain, he said, "I thought I was ending my pain. All I did was multiply it for everyone else." The case sparked wider conversations, too. Talk radio and online forums buzzed with arguments about passion crimes and gun violence. Some insisted Ethan's act was proof of how dangerous it was to let anger and firearms mix. Others framed it as a tragedy born of human weakness, proof that love, when twisted by betrayal, could become lethal. But in courtrooms and classrooms alike, the consensus was clear: pain does not excuse murder. Detective Carla Hughes, who had walked the crime scene that night, reflected on the case in an interview months later. "It's always the same in the end," she said. "One choice, one trigger pull, and there's no going back. People think they're ending one problem, but all they do is create 1,000 more." Even the Walmart itself carried the weight of memory. Employees said customers still asked, in hushed tones, "Is this the store where it happened?" For new hires, the story became a kind of grim initiation. Everyone knew, everyone remembered, even if the lot looked the same as it always had. The hashtag Walmart murder trended for weeks after the verdict, fueled by podcasts, true crime blogs, and endless YouTube breakdowns of the trial. Some creators replayed courtroom footage, pausing to analyze Ethan's trembling voice or Monica's family's tearful reactions. Others used the case to warn viewers about unchecked anger and the devastating spiral of jealousy. In the end, what remained was not just the story of a crime, but the story of lives entangled by choices. Monica and Carlos paid with their lives. Ethan paid with his freedom. Their families paid with grief that would never fully heal. And the community paid with the reminder that even the most ordinary places, a parking lot, a family car, a late-night shift, can become the backdrop for unspeakable tragedy. For Jacksonville, the case became a dark piece of its history, a story people would tell for years. And for everyone who followed it, the lesson was simple but unforgiving. Betrayal may wound the heart, but murder destroys everything.